The cold, grey waters of the North Sea hold their share of secrets, but on July 11th, 1994, the crew of a German border guard vessel stumbled upon a mystery that's now lasted for over 30 years. Floating about 20 kilometres off the coast of the small German island of Heligoland, they found a body. This wasn't just some tragic accident. The man they pulled from the water was unusually tall, impeccably dressed in a suit and tie, and showed obvious signs of brutal violence. He had no ID, no name, and nothing to explain how he'd ended up in the middle of the sea, and to make things even stranger, his body had been deliberately weighed down. For more than 3 decades, investigators have chased shadows across continents, trying to answer 2 simple questions. Who was this man, and who wanted him to disappear forever? This is the story of the man they call the Gentleman. It started as just another day on the water until it wasn't. The German patrol was cutting through the North Sea when they spotted something in the distance. As they got closer, the shape resolved into a human form, bobbing lifelessly in the waves. The recovery was a grim task, but it was back on the deck of the ship that the true scale of the mystery began to unfold. The man was exceptionally tall, later measured at an imposing 6 feet 5, or about 197 centimetres. He had a slim build, and his living weight was estimated to be between 70 and 75 kilograms. That's around 11 to 12 stone. The initial guess from German authorities put his age somewhere between 45 and 50 years old, but it was his clothes that really stood out. He was wearing a light blue, long-sleeved collared shirt, navy trousers made in France, and a pure wool tie. This smart, almost formal attire, so bizarrely out of place in the desolate sea, is what earned him his nickname, the Gentleman. However, any thought of a peaceful death was immediately wiped away by the autopsy. The examination revealed the man had suffered major blunt force trauma to his head and upper body, and critically, the pathologist determined these injuries happened while he was still alive. This was no accident, it was a homicide. Someone had viciously beaten this man before he ever hit the water. And there was another detail, a sinister clue that police kept secret for many years. Attached to the man's body were 2 heavy objects, clearly meant to sink him to the bottom of the North Sea where he'd never be found. It was pure chance, maybe a fluke of the currents or a mistake in how the weights were attached, that he was discovered at all. The killer or killers wanted this man to vanish without a trace. The police in Wilhelmshaven now had a murder victim on their hands, but with no identity, they had no idea where to even begin. Who was this person? Where did he come from? The only clues they had were the clothes on his back and the strange objects used in a failed attempt to hide a murder. The investigation had begun, but it was already lost in a fog of anonymity as deep and cold as the sea that had delivered him. With no name and no face to show the public, investigators had to start with the physical evidence found with the body. Every single item was a potential breadcrumb, a tiny thread that could unravel the whole story. They started with the most obvious clues, his clothes. The man was dressed in a collection of items that seemed to tell a confusing story. He wore a pair of black leather loafers from the high-end British brand Church & Company Limited, which hinted at a certain level of wealth, but a closer look made things more complicated. The shoes weren't new, they'd been repaired. The original soles were replaced with ones from a brand called Phillips, and the heels were made by Dinky Heel plc, a company based in Bristol, England. This suggested that while the man might have had money at some point, he could have also been someone who looked after his belongings, or maybe even bought the expensive shoes second hand. This one detail started to chip away at the gentleman image. As one investigator, Carsten Bettels, later pointed out, the elite vibe of the name didn't quite seem to fit the man's real circumstances. Then there was the tie. It was a pure wool Marks and Spencer tie with a distinctive pattern, a dark blue base with grey, brown, orange and green diagonal stripes. At first, police thought the specific pattern might be for a regiment, a club or a school, which could have narrowed the search down fast. But after tons of checks, they never found a connection. What they did find out years later, in February 2022, was a key manufacturing detail. That specific line of ties was made by Marks and Spencer for its English and French-speaking markets, which at the time included Canada. This small clue was the first real sign pointing investigators away from Germany and toward the English-speaking world. The French-made trousers only added another international layer to the puzzle. But the most bizarre evidence of all were the weights used to sink him. It wasn't until a big public appeal in 2022 that the police finally revealed what they were: 2 cast iron shoe lasts, heavy metal forms that cobblers use to make or repair shoes. These weren't random objects. They were specific, heavy, and very unusual. And they held another clue. The lasts were embossed with the initials AJK, which was the trademark of a company called A.J. Jackson, a maker of cobblers' tools based in, of all places, Bristol, England, the same city where the company that repaired the gentleman's shoes was located. It felt like too much to be a coincidence. Was the gentleman from Bristol, was his killer, or was it all just a meaningless tangle of details? The lasts themselves were an odd choice. They were shaped for a woman's foot, and investigators believe they were antiques, possibly made as far back as the 1920s or 30s. So, the police were starting to build a profile. A very tall man, between 45 and 50, possibly with ties to Great Britain and the Bristol area specifically. He was murdered, weighed down with antique shoemakers' tools, and thrown into the sea only to wash up off the coast of Germany. Despite these clues, the trail was frustratingly cold. Police figured he was probably dumped from a ship, and his body had drifted a long way, meaning the murder could have happened far from where he was found. For years, the case file stayed open but inactive. The gentleman lay in a German grave, his name unknown, his story untold, and his killer still free. The clues were all there, but they weren't leading anywhere. It would take nearly 3 decades and a revolution in forensic science for the case to finally take a shocking new turn. For 27 years, the case of the gentleman was one of Germany's most baffling cold cases. The leads had all gone cold, the evidence pointed in circles, and the man's identity was as much a mystery as it was back in 1994. But in the world of forensics, time can sometimes be an advantage. New technologies pop up, and what was once impossible can become a new source of hope. In December of 2021, the decision was made to bring the gentleman back into the light. His body was exhumed from its grave in Wilhelmshaven. A new team, made up of researchers from Staffordshire University and Plymouth Marjon University in the UK, the German Police Academy of Lower Saxony, and the non-profit Locate International, was ready to apply modern science to these old remains. Their main goal was to get a full DNA profile, something that wasn't possible with the tech they had in 1994. The exhumation was a success, and scientists managed to isolate a complete DNA profile of the unknown man. This was a huge step. His unique genetic code was finally available, ready to be run through international databases, hoping for a family match that could finally give him his name back. As part of this new push, investigators also put out a new photo fit in February 2022, a computer-generated image of what the gentleman might have looked like. This, along with the newly released details about the tie and the iron shoe lasts, kicked off a major media appeal. The story spread like wildfire, and police got over 50 new tips from the public, a flood of potential leads for a case that had been gathering dust for a generation. In March 2023, the case was even featured on the popular Dutch TV show Opsporing Verzocht, widening the search for answers even further. But the biggest bombshell was still to come. While the DNA was being checked, a different kind of analysis was being done on a sample of his bone. Scientists at Murdoch University in Perth, Australia, used a technique called radioisotope analysis. This incredible science works on the principle of you are what you eat. The chemical signatures in our food, water, and even the dust we breathe are different all over the world. These isotopes leave a permanent mark in our bones, a chemical record of where we've lived. The team in Perth analysed this signature in the gentleman's remains, and the result was absolutely astonishing. The analysis revealed that it was highly likely the gentleman had spent most of his life not in Germany, not in the UK, but in Australia. After decades of focusing the search on Europe, the investigation was suddenly ripped to the other side of the planet. It was a twist that nobody saw coming. Brendan Chapman, one of the directors of the Cold Case Review Group, said it best. What are the chances that from this small collection of universities working on this case, one would be from the country where the man originated? The Australian connection opened up a brand new and incredibly huge area to investigate. Who was this remarkably tall man who lived most of his life in Australia, only to be murdered and dumped in the North Sea, wearing British and French clothes and weighed down with antique English tools? The mystery hadn't been solved, it had just gotten infinitely more complex. With the shocking news that the gentleman was probably Australian, the investigation, now spanning 3 decades and multiple continents, had to rethink everything. The DNA profile hadn't turned up a direct match in any databases, so the man's identity was still a question mark. But this new geographical anchor, combined with all the old evidence, has led to a few different theories, each one trying to piece together the life and death of this mysterious man. The first and most obvious step was to check missing person cases from Australia. Investigators looked into the case of David Martin, an Australian millionaire who disappeared in 1992. The timing fit, and a wealthy person might match the gentleman nickname, but there weren't many solid links, and that lead seemed to dry up. Another man, David Kruger, a 6'5" German who went missing from Canada, was also looked at because of his height and the Canadian connection to the M&S tie, but that didn't pan out either. A much more interesting and heavily debated theory revolves around a man named Julian Chisholm. Chisholm was a Scottish-born drug baron who became a major player in the narcotics trade, even dealing directly with the Cali cartel. He was ambitious, ruthless, and knew his way around the high seas, using a yacht for his smuggling runs. In the early 1990s, he disappeared. The timing of his disappearance, around 1993 to 1994, fits perfectly with when the gentleman was discovered. An investigative podcast digging into the case found something even more specific. Julian Chisholm reportedly had a very unusual and distinct jaw deformity, a feature that investigators also found in the remains of the gentleman. This felt like it could be the smoking gun, a direct physical link between the missing drug lord and the unidentified body. But there's one giant problem with the Julian Chisholm theory, a piece of evidence that just won't fit. The original German autopsy from 1994 and every analysis since has consistently estimated the gentleman's age to be between 45 and 50 years old. When Julian Chisholm disappeared, he was only 30. That 15 to 20 year age gap is massive. Could the forensic analysis of his age be that far off? Or is the shared jaw deformity just a crazy coincidence? It's a question that has investigators divided. The podcast exploring the case has spent a lot of time on this exact problem, showing just how tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly far, the Chisholm theory seems to be. A fourth theory takes the case in yet another direction, looking at possible links to a series of violent crimes in Belgium. Around that time, Belgian police were dealing with a crime spree committed by an unusually tall suspect, a man they nicknamed the Giant. Given the gentleman's 6 feet 5 inches frame, investigators have of course explored whether he could be connected to these crimes, maybe as a victim or maybe even as the Giant himself, silenced by his own criminal partners. This idea broadens the European scope of the case, suggesting that even if he lived in Australia, his death may have been tied to organised crime on the continent. Each theory presents a possible story. Was he a wealthy Australian who met a horrible end on a business trip to Europe? Was he a globe-trotting drug lord like Julian Chisholm, whose dangerous life finally caught up to him? Or was he mixed up with a violent crew in Belgium? 30 years later, these are just stories, potential answers to a puzzle with too many pieces missing. The gentleman could be any one of them, or, just as likely, none of them at all. For over 30 years, the case of the gentleman of Heligoland has been a masterclass in forensic frustration and fascinating possibilities. A man is found beaten to death, weighed down with antique tools and thrown into the North Sea. The clues he carried seemed to point to England, a Marks and Spencer tie, repaired shoes from Bristol and cobbler's lasts from the same city. Yet, just as the focus sharpened on the United Kingdom, modern science threw a curveball that sent the whole case spinning to the southern hemisphere. The revelation that he likely spent most of his life in Australia changed everything. turning a European mystery into a global one. Today, he is still nameless. Despite having his full DNA profile, no match has ever been found. We're left with a ghost-like image from a computer and a pile of conflicting clues. He was a man tall enough to stand out in any crowd, who seems to have lived his life on one side of the world and died violently on the other. He wore the clothes of a respectable man, but was disposed of with brutal criminality. Was his smart appearance a true reflection of his life, or just what he happened to be wearing on his last day? Theories about figures like the drug baron Julian Chisholm are compelling, but the stubborn fact of the age estimate leaves them as just that, speculation. The case of the gentleman is a powerful reminder that even in our age of DNA and advanced science, some secrets are kept remarkably well. The key to finally solving this mystery is probably sitting in a missing persons report filed decades ago in Australia, or in the memory of someone who knew a very tall man who just vanished in the early 1990s. Until that connection is made, he remains the gentleman, a man defined only by the clothes he was found in and the brutal way he died. His true story still lost somewhere in the cold, dark waters of the North Sea. The investigation into the identity of the gentleman is still very much active. New information and theories are always surfacing. What do you think happened to him? Which theory seems most likely to you? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you found this case as fascinating as we did, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Thanks for watching.